Well, I don't know what it looks like at your house, but by now the presents have all likely been given. The wrapping paper in the boxes are occupying space in dumpsters or trash bags, or in our case, at the dumpster at the high school. I had to put them somewhere. Some of you have already taken down your trees, and you've already put away the lights, and in a few more days, it'll almost look like Christmas didn't happen, because everything will be back to normal. But before you get to that point, let me ask you a question. Did you get what you wanted for Christmas? That's a rather loaded question, I realize, and maybe a dangerous one for you to answer because you might be sitting next to a person who gave you some of those presents. And you may not want to answer that one out loud, and that's okay. The truth is that if we're dealing with that question, though, that for most of us the answer is yes and no. We got some of the things we wanted. We didn't get some of the other things we wanted. We saw some people we wanted to see and missed out on some others. And for many of us, even in the joy and the fun, there might have been something missing or someone missing. And that's the way it's going to be for us. That's our reality on this earth, isn't it? We take the good, we take the bad, and we just deal with them and sort them out. My hope and my prayer for you guys, though, is that the memories of this Christmas will be joyful and happy. And that as you look back on them, it will be with a focus not on the presents you received, but on the presence of loved ones and of the one who truly loves you. Because if that's what it is, then you got what you wanted for Christmas. In our gospel reading today, we see the story of a man and a woman who waited much longer than the few weeks of Advent that we waited, or even the 12 months that we've waited since the last Christmas, thinking it's never going to get here again. They waited a long, long time, their whole lives, in fact, to see and hear and hold what they were really looking for. Luke tells us that Simeon was a very old man who was known for being devout and righteous, and he spent his days, we're told, hoping for the consolation of Israel, hoping, believing, trusting that what the prophets said would come true, and then all of this would come together and things would be made right, and all of this history would finally one day make sense. We're told that the Holy Spirit rested on him, and at some point in his life, the Spirit had assured him that he wouldn't die until with his own eyes he had seen the Messiah who had been promised. And that's an amazing promise, isn't it? So every day his life is defined and energized by this hope, this trust, this belief that what God said would happen, and that he would get to see it. So every day he goes to the temple. Every day he prays. Every day he hopes. Every day he believes for his entire life, for a very long time. And on the day of the story, he knew that he needed to go to the temple. Now, I don't know if Simeon knew at some level deep in him what he was going to see that day, or if he was just so in touch with God through the cycles and the rhythms of his life of being devout and being righteous that somehow he just knew, I need to be today where I am most days. I need to go today and be in the presence of God and in the presence of God's people. And so he goes, where he is always going. In the temple that day were also some other people. Many others, but the ones that we hear about are Mary and Joseph and their newborn baby. They're there to carry out their religious duty with their new son. And if you want to know what that religious duty is, go back a verse from where I started reading. And you can catch what Luke is talking about. Now, there's one thing to note about what they're doing there in the temple. We're told it was the time for them to come and do what they're supposed to do, to set this one, their firstborn male, aside, apart for God. And they come and they offer an offering. The offering is of 2 doves, 2 pigeons. Now, if you go back and you look in the law, this may not matter for anything at all in the story, but that was the very cheapest offering available. That was the offering for the poorest of the poor. And it's very possible, I thought of this morning, that the people that his parents bought those 2 birds from that day were some of the very same ones that Jesus would run out of the temple later in his life. It's amazing how the stories come back around. But what this does tell us is that Jesus, and we kind of already knew this, but Jesus didn't come into a well-placed, financially secure, important family when he was born. He came into a young family that probably just got by. And maybe that actually does have an impact on the story. We know from this that Mary and Joseph were devout. If they weren't, they wouldn't have been in the temple that day doing what they were doing. They followed the law and even went beyond what the law required. They didn't have to be there for what they were doing, but they wanted to be. But we also know that they didn't have much to offer in the way of material possessions. And I would imagine that they probably looked like they didn't have much to offer. Now, they probably cleaned up as well as they could and did the best they could to present themselves well at the temple, but these were poor people. So if you're Simeon and you have spent every day of your life reading and believing the words of the prophets from years before, that God is going to do something amazing, that God is going to send the Messiah, that God is going to bring all of this together and make it all make sense, I wonder if this young couple with a newborn baby, offering of the poorest of the poor, would have gotten a second look from most of us. Yet there they were, and there Simeon was, and something amazing happened after that. Somehow, when he saw this baby and these parents, he knew. And he takes the baby in his arms and begins to speak and to worship God. And I'll paraphrase here, that what Simeon says when he takes that baby is, okay, God, now I've seen it all. Now my life is complete. Because you have let me see what you told me I could see. And he realized in that moment that the promise that he had been holding on to for so long, the promise to him had come true, but so had the promise to all of Israel. Simeon's promise was that he wouldn't die before he saw the Messiah, but the promise to Israel was something much bigger. The promise to Israel was that God would send one who would bring it all together and make it make sense. And in that day, he praised God and he declared that his life was now full. He could die in peace, for he had seen salvation with his own eyes, but even more than that, he had held salvation in his own arms that day. After a lifetime of waiting, the moment had finally come, and out flowed praise. The moment, that may have been it. I don't know if his life did end shortly after that, but imagine that. A lifetime of hoping, a lifetime of waiting, a lifetime of believing for one moment of holding that baby. And trusting at that point that what God said was going to happen after all. We're told that Mary and Joseph were amazed by this. I wonder why. I mean, they've both been visited by angels. They both were there for this birth that was anything but usual. They both had been told who this child would be, but they're amazed when they hear Simeon's words. But as you read the Gospels, you see that their understanding of this mystery of who their son was an ever unfolding one, an ever growing and ever evolving one. On that day, Simeon and Anna, the prophetess who spent every day there, saw and understood what was really happening, and they understood who this was who was in front of them. And they beheld with their eyes, and they held in their arms the salvation of the world in the person of this little baby, Jesus. And I can't help but think, what an amazing thing to live your entire life, for a long life, waiting for this one moment. And I wonder how many of us have what it takes to be that faithful. To trust for that long. To believe with everything we've got that this one moment, it will all make sense. For Simeon, for Anna, that moment, it all came together. And I think our reading from the epistle helps us to understand more of what that means for us. Listen to these words again that Ralph read for us earlier. But when the fullness of time had come, and I'm going to stop a few times through here. When the fullness of time had come. For Simeon, that day, the fullness of time had come. For the world, in that moment, the fullness of time had come. And one thing I have found over 47 years that I sometimes like and often don't like is that God always operates when the fullness of time has come. When it's just the right time. which is usually for us much later than we want it to be. But we're told that when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, which is why they were in the temple at all, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. And because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a child, and if a child, then also an heir through God. At just the right time in history, when everything came together exactly as it was supposed to, God sent Jesus into the world. Born to human parents, he became one of us. Born into a system that he would both overturn and fulfill. And because of that, because what Simeon had believed came true, because God sent Jesus at exactly the right time, we are no longer slaves, but are children. And because we are children, we receive the Spirit that Jesus had that enables us to relate to God the way that Jesus did and cry out, Abba, Father, Daddy, Papa. It's a cry of intimacy and of closeness. That's the gift that we receive as we become children of God. In becoming human, Jesus opened the door for all of us to become something more, God's children. And that, for us, is the gift of Christmas. That God reached down into human history, took on the flesh and the blood and the bone and the heartache and the joys and the difficulties and all that comes with being human, and in so doing, opened wide the doors of heaven. Simeon and Anna saw in that baby they held long ago that what God had promised would happen. During his lifetime, some saw in Jesus the Christ that he was the one that God had promised. And now we, too, having been made children of God, get to know it firsthand and get to share it freely. Maybe you got what you wanted on Christmas morning. Maybe you didn't. But this I know for sure. The gift that we all receive because the birth happened is always just what we need at just the right time, because it opens the door for us to new life. To life as children of God. Not slaves, but children and heirs of the promise. So may you and I live today and each day as beloved children of God. The ones for whom God was willing to take on all of this to redeem. And may we use each day as an opportunity to help others see what they are as well. Children of God.